Welcome back to the Book Triangle podcast.
Great to be here.
We're continuing our series Navigating Modern India, and today, well, we're looking at a really pivotal time.
Absolutely, a period of intense change.
We're focusing on Unit 6, Chapter 13. That's the first phase of revolutionary activities, roughly 1907 to 1917.
A really crucial decade.
And for this exploration, our main guide is, as usual for this series, Modern India by Spectrum. It's such a comprehensive source for getting into the details.
It really is. Lays things out very clearly.
Our goal here is to unpack this intense phase, offering insights useful for, competitive exams, but also for anyone just keen to understand the freedom struggle more deeply.
Yes, because this period marks a really significant shift, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, we see the nationalist movement moving away from those earlier moderate or even the militant constitutional methods.
Right, the petitions and protests within the system.
Exactly. Towards more direct action, sometimes forceful, often violent action.
So it's crucial to understand why this happened. What pushed people, especially young people, down this path?
Precisely. We need to look at the circumstances, the growing disillusionment that propelled them.
And we'll cover the ideology, the main players, where these activities happened.
Both inside India and, interestingly, quite far beyond its borders, too.
Okay, so let's get started. Let's unpack this fascinating and often, intense part of history. The genesis of revolutionary activities, 1907, 1917.
Okay, so the genesis. How did this really radical shift come about? This first phase, 1907, 1917, it didn't just appear out of thin air.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It was, you could say, a direct consequence of what came just before.
Which was?
Primarily two things. First, the rise of militant nationalism, that more assertive stance.
Okay.
And second, maybe even more critically, the decline or perceived failure of the Swadeshi and boycott movement after about 1905.
Ah, right. So you had this huge surge of energy during Swadeshi.
Exactly. Especially among younger nationalists. They poured their hearts into it. And then it felt like it was fizzling out. Or being crushed.
Precisely. They were filled with this patriotic fervor, but suddenly there seemed to be no clear way to express it. Open political protest was fading, or facing severe repression.
Leaving them disillusioned and kind of directionless.
Yes, and the sources suggest that even the extremist leaders, people like Tilak, despite their powerful calls for sacrifice,
they were seen as maybe not having the next step.
Well, perceived as having failed to create the right kind of organizations or, innovative political strategies to really channel that revolutionary energy effectively.
So the youth are looking at their leaders, feeling the repression, and seeing traditional methods fail.
Exactly. Under that mounting government pressure, and we're talking serious crackdowns, bans on meetings, arrests, censorship, peaceful protest looked increasingly ineffective, or just impossible.
So they reached a pretty stark conclusion.
They did. A growing number of frustrated young people decided that only physical force, literally kicking the British out, could achieve independence.
It wasn't a sudden decision, though, you're saying. More of a slow burn.
A gradual accumulation of frustration, yeah. A realization that petitions and prayers weren't working against this deeply entrenched colonial power. They felt they'd hit a wall.
Okay, so that explains the why. What about the what? What did their actual program, their ideology look like?
The core objective was simple, stark even. Complete independence. Purna Swaraj.
But achieved through armed revolution.
Yes. The physical expulsion of British rule. No compromise.
And the methods. Pretty drastic, I imagine.
They were. Assassinations were a key tactic.
Targeting specific British officials.
Usually unpopular ones, yes. The aim was twofold. Strike fear into the administration, show they were vulnerable.
And send a message. Inspire others, perhaps.
Perhaps. Also dacoities. Political robberies.
Not just random crime, though.
No. Carefully planned. Often targeting wealthy collaborators or government funds. The goal was purely to raise money.
Money for what? Arms.
For arms, bomb-making materials, supporting the revolutionaries, funding the operations. Which leads to the next point. Procuring arms.
A dangerous business in itself.
Extremely. Trying to get weapons, explosives, sometimes looking for foreign help.
And how did they organize all this? It had to be secret.
Absolutely. Through secret societies. Underground networks for planning, recruiting, and trying to evade British intelligence.
Which must have been everywhere.
Oh, certainly. The British intelligence network was formidable.
So they had this clear goal, this fierce patriotism, these methods. But you mentioned limitations earlier.
Yes, and this is crucial to understand why this phase, despite the heroism, ultimately declined. There were significant inherent limitations.
Like what?
One major one, particularly noted in Bengal, was an overemphasis on Hindu religion.
How did that play out?
Well, the use of Hindu symbols, rituals invoking Hindu heroes or deities,
Yeah.
while perhaps authentic for those involved,
It excluded others, Muslims, for instance.
it inadvertently alienated a large segment of the Muslim population. This prevented the kind of broad, united front that was really needed.
That's a huge limitation, hindering that pan-Indian unity.
Absolutely. It played right into the British divide-and-rule strategy, too.
Yeah.
They could frame it as a sectarian issue.
Did this alienation directly impact their operations beyond just limiting numbers?
It made intelligence gathering easier for the British, certainly, and it limited passive support in many areas. It prevented it becoming a truly national threat in the way, say, the later Gandhian movements did.
What other limitations were there?
Another tendency was towards what some historians call quixotic heroism.
Meaning, like tilting at windmills.
Sort of. A focus on individual acts of bravery, martyrdom. Think of Khudiram Bose, incredibly brave, but one young man against an empire.
Inspiring, yes, but maybe not strategically sustainable.
Exactly. While these acts were hugely symbolic and demonstrated immense courage, they often lacked the strategic depth, the coordination needed for a sustained mass movement.
Which connects to another point you made earlier, the lack of mass involvement.
Precisely. This was largely an elite phenomenon, middle class, often upper caste youth.
Not the farmers, the workers, the vast majority.
Generally, no. They didn't really envisage mobilizing the broad masses, nor did they succeed in doing so, this narrow social base. Well, it severely limited their reach, their sustainability.
Making them easier to isolate and crush.
Absolutely. And that leads directly to their vulnerability to state repression.
Because they were clandestines, operating in small groups.
Yes, small cells, isolated acts. They were highly susceptible to the British intelligence and police machine, which was well-organized, ruthless, and experienced.
A stark contrast, really. Desperate courage versus organized state power.
A defining and ultimately tragic characteristic of this phase, too. A survey of revolutionary activities within India.
Okay, let's look at where these activities were most prominent within India. Bengal seems like the obvious starting point.
Definitely. Bengal was really the cradle of this early revolutionary nationalism, a major hub.
And it grew out of the Swadeshi movement's legacy there.
Largely, yes. Swadeshi had already ignited that strong anti-British feeling. The ground was fertile for more radical ideas to take root.
What were the main organizations in Bengal?
Two stand out. The Anushilan Samiti was key. Founded in Calcutta by figures like Pramotha Mitter, Birendra Kumar Ghosh.
Birendra Kumar Ghosh, Aurobindo Ghosh's brother.
That's the one. And there was a very significant branch in Dhaka, East Bengal, set up by Pulin Das in 1906.
What was special about the Dhaka branch?
It was known for its really rigorous training, physical, moral, almost like creating dedicated revolutionary cadres.
And the other main group?
Chagantar. This was both a secret society and the name of a hugely influential newspaper.
A newspaper advocating revolution. Openly.
Pretty much. It advocated revolutionary terrorism, spread fiery messages, and really captured the imagination of disillusioned youth.
And then there were specific incidents that really shook things up. The Muzaffarpur bomb case.
1908. A pivotal, tragic event. Two very young revolutionaries, Prafulla Chaki and Khudiram Bose.
Khudiram Bose was incredibly young, wasn't he? Like 18.
Barely. They tried to assassinate District Judge Kingsford, who was notorious for harsh sentences against nationalists.
But they miss.
Tragically, yes. They threw the bomb at a carriage they thought was his, but it hit another one, killing two British women who had no connection to Kingsford.
A terrible outcome. What happened to Cheki and Bose?
Cheki, facing capture, committed suicide. Khudiram Bose was arrested, tried, and swiftly executed.
Becoming an instant martyr.
An immensely powerful symbol of sacrifice. The act, despite its tragic error, sent shockwaves through the British administration and, paradoxically, inspired many.
And the British response was the Alipore conspiracy case.
Yes, a massive crackdown followed Muzaffarpur. This led to the Alipore case in 1908-09. Aurobindo Ghosh and 37 others were arrested.
And this revealed the extent of the network.
It did. It exposed the widespread web of revolutionary cells across Bengal, confirming British fears about this underground movement.
You also mentioned Jat Mukherjee, Bhagajatan.
A truly iconic figure. Bhaga means tiger. He famously said, "We shall die to awaken the nation." That really sums up the ethos.
He was involved in the German plot during World War I.
He was a key figure. an ambitious plan to get arms from Germany to launch a nationwide uprising while Britain was busy with the war.
How did that end for him?
It culminated in a gunfight in Balasore on the Orissa coast in September 1915. He and his companions fought bravely against police but were outnumbered. Jatin died a hero's death there.
So alongside these actions, propaganda was key. Newspapers like Sandia and Yugantar.
Absolutely crucial. They disseminated revolutionary ideas, used powerful language, and really galvanized the youth. They were essential recruiting tools.
But ultimately, the movement in Bengal couldn't sustain itself.
No. Despite the courage and the impact on educated youth, it couldn't withstand the sheer weight of state repression.
And the limitations we talked about earlier, the narrow social base, the Hindu symbolism alienating Muslims.
Exactly. Those factors played a major role in its eventual decline in Bengal, making it easier for the British to isolate and dismantle the networks.
Okay, let's move west. Maharashtra was another significant center.
Yes, very important. And it had its own distinct history of nationalist thought.
With figures like Savarkar.
V.D. Savarkar and his brother Ganesh were central. They organized the Mitra Mela back in 1899, a secret society.
Which became Avinav Bharat.
Exactly. It merged into Avinav Bharat Young India Society in 1904. And interestingly, they were explicitly inspired by Mazzini's Young Italy.
Shows us international connections again.
It does. Avinav Bharat emphasized revolutionary nationalism, secret action, building a clandestine network.
Where were their main centers of activity?
Nashik, Pune, and Bombay became key hubs. Places for planning and significantly for bomb manufacture.
So practical preparations for armed struggle.
Definitely. And this led to another major incident, the assassination of A.M.T. Jackson in 1909.
Who was Jackson?
He was the collector of Nashik. Interestingly, also a well-known Indologist, a scholar of India.
Assassinated by whom?
Anant Lakshman Kanhir, a young member of Abhinav Bharat.
And the British response? Predictably harsh.
Very much so. It led directly to the Nashik conspiracy case.
Which implicated Savarkar directly.
Yes. The trial identified Savarkar as the brain, leader, and moving spirit behind the whole conspiracy.
Leading to his transportation for life.
Correct. To the cellular jail in the Andamans Kalapani and forfeiture of his property. A major blow, removing a key intellectual leader.
And like in Bengal, the press played a role in Maharashtra too. The journal Kal.
Yes, Kal was a significant voice advocating revolutionary activity in Maharashtra, similar to Yugantar's role in Bengal.
It's striking how similar the patterns are. Secret societies, assassinations, press propaganda, followed by state crackdown.
It is. It raises the question of how much direct coordination there was versus parallel evolution driven by similar circumstances and ideas. The sources suggest mostly parallel development at this stage.
Now, what about Punjab? A region with strong martial traditions.
Yes, and also the influence of the Arya Samaj movement, fostering pride and self-assertion. Punjab definitely saw a surge in revolutionary activities.
What were the specific triggers there?
Repressive government land policies were a major factor, things like the Colonization Act and the Punjab Land Alienation Act.
These angered the rural population.
Deeply. Widespread resentment, particularly among the peasantry.
Who were the early figures stirring things up?
Lala Lajpat Rai and Ajit Singh were prominent. Ajit Singh founded the Bharat Mata Society.
And their deportation in 1907 just fueled the fire.
Absolutely. It inflamed sentiments, turned them into symbols of resistance.
You mentioned the Ghadar movement earlier. Strong connections to Punjab.
Very strong. While Ghadar mostly started abroad, its ideology deeply influenced Punjab revolutionaries. Figures like Kartar Singh Sarabha actually returned to India from North America to organize.
Trying to link the diaspora movement with action on the ground.
Exactly. And there's a fascinating detail about the dacoities in Punjab around 1915.
What's that?
Our sources mention that several major political dacoities specifically targeted moneylenders and destroyed debt records before taking cash.
So it wasn't just about funding the revolution. It had a social angle.
It seems so. Directly addressing agrarian distress, the burden of debt. This gave their actions a different dimension, potentially creating more sympathy among the oppressed peasantry.
Even if those peasants weren't directly involved in the revolutionary groups themselves.
Right. It created a potentially explosive situation, linking the freedom struggle directly to local economic grievances. 3. Revolutionary activities abroad, internationalizing the struggle.
So the fight wasn't just within India. Let's talk about the activities abroad. Starting with London, right in the heart of the empire.
Yes, incredibly bold. India House in London, founded by Shyamji Krishnavarma in 1905, was crucial.
It was more than just a hostel for students, wasn't it?
Oh, much more. It was an intellectual hub, a center for nationalist activity, debates, planning, all under the nose of the British, though they were certainly watching.
And Krishnavarma published the Indian Sociologist.
He did, a key journal promoting nationalist, even revolutionary ideas among Indians abroad.
Then came the assassination of Curzon Willie in 1909.
By Madan Lal Dhingra, a truly audacious act. Curzon Willie was a high-ranking official, an aide to the Secretary of State for India.
Killed in London. That must have sent shockwaves.
Absolutely. It demonstrated the reach of this revolutionary fervor, that even in London, British officials weren't safe. A powerful, if terrifying message for the British establishment.
Moving across the channel, Paris was another center.
Yes, Paris became something of a haven, and Madame Bikaji Kama is a standout figure there.
She's famous for unfurling the first version of the Indian flag, right?
In 1907, at the International Socialist Congress in Stuttgart, Germany, a tricolor flag, green, saffron, red, a hugely symbolic act on an international stage.
Bringing India's struggle to global attention.
Exactly. But she did more than symbols. She published the revolutionary journal Banda Matram from Paris.
Advocating complete independence.
Uncompromisingly so. These efforts abroad were vital for internationalizing the struggle, seeking allies, making noise globally.
And Germany, especially during World War I.
Germany became very important. Britain's enemy became a potential ally for Indian revolutionaries. The Berlin Committee for Indian Independence was formed.
Aiming to leverage the war for India's freedom.
Precisely. Mobilizing international support, seeking German help.
Key figures there. Virendranath Chattopadhyay.
Yes, Chatto, a brilliant strategist. He published the journal Talwar the Sword from Berlin.
And the Berlin Committee was involved in the German plot with Jatin Mukherjee.
Deeply involved, trying to coordinate getting German arms into India for a large-scale uprising.
Did they do other things too?
Yes, they sent missions to work among Indian soldiers, especially prisoners of war held by Germany and its allies in the Middle East and Turkey.
Trying to incite mutiny.
Trying to encourage anti-British sentiment, defections, anything to weaken the British war effort and aid India's cause. It was a multi-pronged approach.
Okay, across the Atlantic now. North America, the Ghadar movement, this seems huge.
It was arguably the most significant overseas revolutionary movement of this phase. The Ghadar Party formed in San Francisco in 1913.
Primarily Sikh immigrants from Punjab.
Mostly, yes, but significantly, it included Hindus and Muslims too. It had a broader base than some groups within India, led by figures like Lala Hardayal, Sohan Singh Bhakna, Kartar Singh Sarabha.
And their goal was?
Explicitly, the overthrow of British rule in India through armed rebellion. No ambiguity there.
Their newspaper, Ghadar, was key.
Immensely powerful. Ghadar means rebellion. It circulated incredibly widely among the Indian diaspora in North America, Europe, Asia.
Spreading the message, calling for revolt.
Yes, using print media very effectively across continents and multiple languages. Then came the Kamagata Maru incident in 1914.
Tell us about that. Sounds significant.
It was deeply tragic and infuriating. A Japanese ship, the Kamagata Maru, carrying nearly 400 Indian passengers, mostly Sikhs from Punjab seeking to immigrate to Canada.
They were denied entry.
Yes, due to racist, discriminatory Canadian immigration laws, influenced by British policies, the ship was forced to return to India.
And when it reached Calcutta?
At Budge, near Calcutta, there was a confrontation with the police. The authorities tried to forcibly send them back to Punjab. Clashes broke out, and tragically, 22 passengers were killed.
That must have inflamed passions incredibly.
It did. It starkly highlighted the discrimination Indians faced globally under the British system and became a major rallying cry for the Ghadar Party. Proof that revolution was necessary.
So when World War I started, Ghadar saw its chance.
They absolutely did. They urged their followers, thousands of them, to return to India immediately.
To launch the revolution while Britain was distracted.
Exactly. It was seen as India's golden opportunity. Thousands answered the call, sailing back to India with the aim of starting an uprising.
Were they coordinating with revolutionaries inside India?
Yes, they tried. They contacted Bengal revolutionaries, asking leaders like Rash Behari Bose and Sachin Sanyal to help lead the movement on the ground once the Ghadarites arrived.
Showing attempts at a unified strategy.
Definitely. It highlights the ambition, the effort to connect the diaspora's resources with internal networks. Imagine if that had fully succeeded, history might look quite different.
Were there other efforts abroad as well? You mentioned Kabul.
Yes, a fascinating, if less known, venture. The Provisional Indian Government established in Kabul in 1915.
A government in exile.
Essentially,
Right.
led by Raja Mahendra Pratap Singh, Barkatullah, and Obaidullah Sindhi. They set it up in neutral Afghanistan during WWI
What was their goal?
to gain official recognition and support, especially from Afghanistan's ruler and from the Central Powers like Germany and Turkey, to help liberate India.
Part of that wider strategy of hitting Britain wherever possible.
Exactly, including trying to influence Indian troops and POWs in places like Baghdad, Persia, Turkey. It was a truly global chessboard they were trying to play on. 4. Decline of the first phase of revolutionary activities by 1917.
So we've seen this incredible burst of activity both in India and abroad, full of courage and ambition. But by around 1917, this first phase starts to decline. Why?
Several factors converged, unfortunately, for the revolutionaries. The biggest, perhaps, was intense state repression.
The British really clamped down.
Systematically and brutally, they passed a whole series of laws specifically designed to crush this movement.
Like the Seditious Meetings Act.
Yes, 1907. And the Indian Newspapers Act in 1908, the Criminal Law Amendment Act, the Explosive Substances Act, also in 1908.
And the Indian Press Act in 1910.
Exactly. These gave the authorities sweeping powers, banning meetings, shutting down newspapers, confiscating property, imprisoning people without proper trial. It created a climate of fear and made operations incredibly difficult.
And they didn't just pass laws, they targeted the leaders.
Crucially, yes. The arrest and deportation of key leaders was devastating. We mentioned Tilak being sent to Mandalay for 6 years.
And Savarkar transported for life.
Right. Others, like Aurobindo Ghosh, withdrew from active politics. B.C. Pal too. Lajpat Rai went abroad. This left the movement fractured and often leaderless.
Hard to maintain momentum without that core leadership.
Very hard, especially against such organized opposition.
We also talked about the lack of a broad popular base. That must have been a factor in the decline, too.
Absolutely, remaining largely confined to educated, urban, middle-upper-class youth.
It made them easier to isolate.
Much easier. They didn't have the protection or the recruiting pool that a genuine mass movement would offer. The British could contain them more effectively.
And the strategic limitations. Relying on individual heroic acts.
Yes, that was another inherent weakness. While inspiring, assassinations and dacoities couldn't fundamentally challenge the structure of British rule.
Not sustainable against an empire.
No. There wasn't really a coherent long-term strategy for a mass revolution that could scale up and withstand pressure. It was often reactive, localized.
The issue of communal alienation also played a role, you argued.
It certainly didn't help. The perception, fair or not, of Hindu dominance in some key groups hindered the creation of that united front. Muslims often remained aloof, limiting the movement's national scope.
And finally, the whole political scene was changing by the end of this period.
Yes, the shifting political landscape was critical. World War I ended, bringing new global dynamics.
And new movements within India were gaining traction.
Exactly. The Home Rule Leagues, led by Besant and Tilak after his release, offered a more constitutional but still assertive path that gained wide support.
And then the game changer, Gandhi.
The emergence of Mahatma Gandhi onto the national stage, with his philosophy of nonviolent satyagraha, that offered a completely different approach.
One that emphasized mass participation.
Yes, a mass-based, nonviolent alternative that began to capture the public imagination and draw energy away from the revolutionary path. It offered hope and a method that many more people felt they could participate in.
So a combination of intense repression from outside and internal limitations, plus new political alternatives emerging.
That sums it up well. It led to the decline of this specific phase of revolutionary activity by around 1917. Summary. So to pull it all together, this first phase, roughly 1907 to 1917, it was really a response desperate, certainly, but incredibly courageous.
From young people who felt the door was shut on peaceful protests.
Exactly. A byproduct of militant nationalism, fueled by the frustration after Swadeshi seemed to fail, they saw armed struggle as the only way to achieve complete independence.
And we saw how this played out across India. Bengal being the hub with groups like Anushalan Samiti and Jugantar, major events like the Muzaffarpur bombing, Figures like Khudiram Bose, Aurobindo Ghosh, Bhagat Jatin.
Then Maharashtra, with Savarkar's Abhinav Farut, inspired by Mazzini, the assassination of Jackson, the Nashik conspiracy case.
And Punjab, fueled by land issues, figures like Ajit Singh, the Gadar connection, and those interesting dacoities targeting moneylenders.
And crucially, it wasn't just an internal struggle, it went global.
Right. India House in London, Dhingra's assassination there, Madame Kama in Paris unfurling the flag, publishing Bande Matram.
The Berlin Committee, during WWI, trying to get German help, the German plot. And perhaps most significantly abroad, the Gadar Party in North America.
With its newspaper, the Komagata Maro incident fueling anger, and the mass return of Gadarites during the war.
Plus, efforts like the provisional government in Kabul, it shows the truly international dimension they envisioned for the struggle.
But despite all that bravery and sacrifice, the decline set in.
Driven by that relentless state repression, the laws, the arrests, the deportations.
The loss of key leaders was huge.
Absolutely. Combined with the narrow social base, the lack of mass involvement.
And the strategic limits of relying on individual acts, plus the communal alienation factor.
It all contributed. And then the rise of alternative movements like Home Rule and especially Gandhi's Satyagraha offered a different path.
So a crucial lesson emerges, doesn't it?
It really does. The desire for freedom was incredibly strong, the courage immense, but overthrowing an empire needed more than just courage.
It needed a strategy that could unite diverse people, mobilize the masses, and withstand that systematic repression.
Precisely. This era, though suppressed, wasn't a failure in spirit. It laid down markers for complete independence, created heroes, and kept the flame alive, influencing future generations in ways they perhaps couldn't have foreseen. Outro.
As we wrap up this look into the first phase of revolutionary activities, it definitely leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about the legacy. How did the lessons learned here, both the successes and, maybe more importantly, the failures, how do they influence the later movements, the ones that did eventually lead to independence?
That's the critical question. What impact did these bold, often sacrificial acts have on the national psyche, even as the dominant strategy shifted towards nonviolence and mass action?
It's complex. You see this incredible commitment, this willingness to sacrifice everything.
Absolutely unwavering commitment, but it also starkly reveals the immense challenges of fighting a powerful, established empire.
Yeah. And it underscores that point you made. Individual heroism inspires, but maybe sustainable change needs that broader mobilization.
And evolving political approaches, adapting to the situation, the spirit of defiance, the demand for Purna Swaraj, though, that certainly carried forward.
Well, thank you for joining us for this exploration of such a critical, intense chapter in modern Indian history. We hope it's given you plenty to think about.
We encourage you to reflect on these events, their causes, their consequences.
And please do join us next time as we continue our journey through navigating modern India, covering all the chapters from Spectrum's Modern India, aiming for more insightful discussions.
We'll keep unpacking the complexities of India's path to independence.
Stay tuned.